Chapter 3 of Tractate Temurah continues covering the various laws of substituting animal offerings in regards to offspring. The first Mishnah says there are consecrated animals whose offspring and also their substitutions have the exact same status as the original offering. This would apply to their offspring and to their offspring's offspring forever. For instance, a shlomim's offspring and a shlomim's substitution are considered to be fully shlomim offerings and must be waved and leaned on and have libations. The Gemara says it specifies that a shlomim's offspring and its offspring, etc., forever are all shlomim, to specify that all animals born from the shlomim forever down are considered to be shlomims. That's then sourced. Now, when we say that a shlomim's offspring is considered sanctified, some say it's even sanctified fully to be offered on the altar in accordance with a particular unique opinion, while others hold it simply is left to graze until it develops a blemish. Further sources are quoted on this, including one which says that the substitution of an olah or shlomim and the offspring of a shlomim can be offered on the altar. Then specifically it says that there's a tradition that the chatas is offspring of an offspring and its substitution must be left to die, and we learn from a verse that if somebody impermissibly then offers this, that's a violation of a positive commandment. It quotes alternative opinions that prove we have tradition that the substitution of an asham cannot be offered either. It also sources that the offspring and substitution of a blemished animal can viably be offered. New Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer actually disagrees and says the offspring of the shlomim cannot be offered as a shlomim. The sages say it can. Specifically, they both agree that the grandchild of a shlomim is not a shlomim. They dispute by a regular offspring of a shlomim. Another sage testified in accordance with the sage's opinion. The Gemara says, our source for Rabbi Eliezer is simply that it's a rabbinic decree to prevent people from raising flocks of offspring shlomims, which could then potentially be impermissibly used. When we said that Rabbi Eliezer and the sages agree in regards to grandchildren of the shlomim, we initially said this means they agree they're not shlomim, but others actually say we agree that they are shlomim. It disputes between these opinions, and it mentions that a meiser offspring would not be offered. In regards to the particularly testified on case where it said the offspring of the animal was a shlomim, it's explained to refer to a shlomim that's being offered on the holiday of Shavuos based on the specific used words. New Mishnah. By the offspring of a toda or a substitution of a toda, their offspring and offspring of their offspring forever down are treated like a toda, besides that they're not brought with bread like the original one was. The Gemara spends some time sourcing this. New Mishnah. By the offspring of an olah or substitution of an olah, their offspring and the offspring of their offspring forever down are treated like an olah, meaning they're skinned and dismembered and are burnt entirely in fires. If a female animal is designated as an olah, which isn't allowed as it must be a male, if the animal gives birth to a male, the offspring is left to graze until it develops a blemish, it should be sold and the proceeds go to bring a new olah. Rabbi Eliezer says the offspring itself should just be offered as an olah. The Gemara says, at the end it was a dispute by the offspring of a female olah, but initially it was agreed its offspring is offered. So some just say the first half was just taught like the final opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and others say that the offspring is the regular olah if it's a female that was substituted for a male olah, which has a child, assuming the original offspring is also being brought. Now, elsewhere, this final opinion of Rabbi Eliezer says that the offspring of an olah should have their proceeds used to bring a new olah. However, he just said here that the offspring itself is an olah. So it's answered, he's either quoting the disagreeing opinion, or it's that the case is with the male offspring of the substitution of an asham, so the parent isn't even called an olah, so there, in that case, he'd concede the offspring isn't offered on the altar. Elsewhere, however, it's explained that Rabbi Eliezer holds, if a female animal is designated for a paschal offering and it wasn't offered and Passover ended, but it bore a male offspring over Passover, he'd say the offspring should be brought as a shlomim, evidently in spite of the fact that its parent is not a shlomim. So it's explained either that this is different, as the leftover paschal offering itself could be offered as a shlomim, or it's that the leftover offspring becomes a shlomim, so the offspring also could be a shlomim. Although others dispute this notion that the offspring gets the same status as its mother, as it said that if a female animal is designated as a paschal offering, it said that the offspring itself should also be brought as a paschal offering. So it explains this is just a unique case, as it was designated while it was pregnant, according to the opinion that the fetus does not have the same status as the mother, so while the mother could not be a proper paschal offering, as it's a female, the son can. However, it is said that Rabbi Eliezer would concede if somebody designates a female animal as an asham, its male child is not an asham. This is different from where the offspring of a female olah can be an olah, as it shares a title with its parent, not as it have the same gender, as a female asham cannot even have the same title of an asham. It didn't just only teach the case of an olah, as here the mother was actually sanctified here as an asham, so it needed to say the offspring here would not be a valid asham offering. New Mishnah. If somebody designated a female animal as an asham, it should be left to graze until it's blemished, and it should then be sold, and an asham should be brought with the proceeds. If the owner had already brought some other proper asham, some say the proceeds go to the voluntary communal offering, and others say the female asham should just be sold, even if it's not blemished. The Gemara says the reason this female asham is left to develop a blemish instead of it being enough that it's just incorrectly consecrated is as it has monetary sanctity, so therefore it should also have physical sanctity. Meaning if somebody consecrated a male sheep, a ram, for its monetary value, it is agreed it would then have physical sanctity. Now some say it should just be sold even without a blemish, as they'd hold it doesn't actually have physical sanctity as it's not fit to be offered as a sacrifice. A premature offering can be sanctified uniquely, as it's similar to the Bechor, as that's where its laws are derived from. Related, there's a dispute. If somebody consecrates a female animal as his Ola, or a paschal offering, or an Asham, which must be a male, those can be substituted. Rabbi Shimon says this can only be done with the Ola, as an offering can only be substituted if it would need to be left to graze to be blemished. Rebbe would say then the paschal offering would also be left to be substituted, as if it's a leftover, it becomes a shlomim. This would not then apply by an asham, as he holds a leftover asham goes to a communal offering which cannot be substituted. So according to Rabbi Shimon, by a Kohen Gadol's bull chatas, if a female cow was brought, that doesn't get physical sanctity, as if it's brought as a red heifer, such an animal is consecrated for temple upkeep, and substitutions don't come from there. And if a he-goat was brought instead of the proper she-goat chatas, there is the variation by the Nasi's he-goat, but there's no comparison as those are brought by different people, so it would not acquire physical sanctity. And if somebody brought a he-goat instead of a she-goat, and then he actually became the actual Nasi, the prior still wasn't physically sanctified, as he hadn't actually sinned to need to bring the Nasi's he-goat, which is clarified, and it discusses some additional principles on this. New Mishnah. By the substitution of an asham offering and the offspring of the actual substitution and its offspring forever down, those should be left to graze until they develop a blemish, and should then be sold for the voluntary communal offering. Others just say they should be left to die, while others hold an ola should be brought with the proceeds. An asham whose owner died, or if the owner was atoned through some other different asham, this asham should be left to graze until it gets a blemish, and it should then be sold for the voluntary communal offering. And others say it should be left to die, and others say the proceeds should be used to buy an ola. Now, the first opinion said we should bring a voluntary communal offering, which is literally also just an ola, but there's a difference. A regular ola must have semicha, meaning libations, which are brought from its funds, and if the owner was a Kohen, he can do the service and receive its tithe. If it was a voluntary communal offering, none of these apply. There's no leaning, the libations are brought from communal funds, and the service and hide go to the current Mishmar watch. The Gemara says it repeats these principles by the substitution of an asham and its offspring, and by the asham whose owner died, to show everybody maintains their respective opinions in all of these cases. Although it is clarified that it is agreed that if the asham has already been offered and atonement occurred, the substitution's offspring itself should be offered as an ola. However, others say that this is essentially just a second generation offspring which cannot be offered, so that's unresolved. If somebody designated a female animal as an asham, if it has male offspring, it's disputed if that child is offered as an ola, as the mother does not share the title of ola. However, some say that the offspring can still be an ola, as both the mother and the son are vowed to be offered for something, as the mother can still be an asham. Now, elsewhere it does say that by a substitution's offspring and its offspring forever down, an ola should be brought with their proceeds, meaning they themselves cannot be an ola. So it suggests this could work if the animal gave birth to a female, and then apparently every single one of its descendants forever after was a female. So not one of them could be an ola, or more reasonably, is just a rabbinic institution to prevent people from doing the same by an asham. New Mishnah. By the substitution of a firstborn animal and animal meiser, their offspring and their offspring's offspring forever down are like the original firstborn and meiser, and are eaten in a blemished state by their owners. There's some differences between blemished bechor and meisers, and all other blemished offerings, which is a repeating point from chapter 5 of Tractate Bechoros. By all typical offerings, if they're blemished, they can be sold and slaughtered in markets, and they're weighed against a literal weight, they can be redeemed, and their substitutes can be redeemed, and all of this does not apply by the Bechor and Meiser tithes. Also, regular offerings can be brought from outside of Israel, while Bechor and Meisers are not. If Bechors and Meisers are brought from outside of Israel, if they're not blemished, they're offered on the altar, and if they are blemished, they're eaten by their owners as is. The difference is, as Bechors and Meisers lose their consecration upon being blemished, unlike by regular offerings. The Gemara says, if somebody blemishes a substitution of a firstborn or a Meiser animal, or possibly on the 9th counted Meiser animal, as neither of those are offered on the altar, it questions if there's lashes for blemishing those. There's some quoted variation. Now, it's actually a dispute as to if Bechoros from outside of Israel are offered on the altar. It also sources scripturally the fact that eating Meiser Sheni in Jerusalem after the destruction of the temple is prohibited, which is additionally discussed further. This would apply to ban the consumption of the Bechor, which it also sources from a specific case. And then it said that this principle of Meiser Sheni could be derived from the Bechor. This is permitted as Meiser Sheni is not considered to be consecrated, so it could be derived in this manner. It additionally discusses this comparison between these two types of offerings, proving that Meiser Sheni is only eaten within Jerusalem, or possibly even outside, within sight of the walls, while a Bechor must actually be eaten inside of the city itself. it discusses the necessity for some additional verses. And that's the end of chapter 3.